So phenomenal conversations are designed to contribute and help co-create regenerative culture. And I do that by interviewing regenerative change makers such as Eva, that I feel are living the change, not just preaching the change, but are living it in the way that they interact in their professional and personal lives. That I'm trying to enable and expand imagination in the midst of the polycrisis. The more creatively we can look at what's going on and take different perspectives, I think it's inspiring for people to think differently. I'm trying to amplify meaningfulness and nuance in a chaotic world, and then also ask profound questions. So that's all embedded in the design. And I'll share a few resources that I've created recently to explain this in a bit more detail. I'll share that in the follow-up. And about me, I've got a background of 20 years in the UK, working with young, underprivileged young people. And alongside that, I was doing a very intense spiritual exploration and journey where we practiced fourth person knowing together, although we called it something different. I think we called it enlightened communication or somewhat similar. And that's inspired me to always try to be generative, even in the life conditions we're experiencing at the moment. So that being said, I'm going to pin myself and Eva in the center so that that can be on the recording, and we'll start the interview. Okay, great. Thanks to you, Eva, for agreeing to do this conversation and dialogue today. Thanks for everybody that's shown up. And if you're seeing details put in the chat, you've just arrived, do share yours, because we wouldn't have time to do a round the robin introduction. So welcome, Eva. And one of the things I don't typically do is introduce the speaker and read out their bio. Instead, I ask them to tell their story of what's, alive for them in the moment, of how they come to be busy with, for first person knowing or whatever else you're busy with at the moment. Give us a little short synopsis on that, if you would.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. And it's so nice to gather in this way. And just actually something I'm really holding right now, or that's coming up a lot in the spaces I'm in, are how many people are gathering in small groups like this for deep dialogue, right, and for exchange, and it's cropping up all over the place. And I think as things get more and more turbulent, certainly where I'm sitting, but I think everywhere in the world, I think it's interesting and very uplifting just to see these spaces and be in them. So very grateful to be here. And then what's also interesting about not being introduced is that it offers, those strange connections. I too have spent time in the UK, 8 years, working with young people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, my work was with young people who had been excluded from school. And so that's an interesting connect. I was not on a spiritual path in any way at that point, so missed that connection or that opportunity. That came a bit later. But I guess in terms of introductions, I work with the Presencing Institute, which many of you will be familiar with, some may not be. It's an organization, we think of ourselves as an action research organization that approaches change from an awareness-based systems change point of view. And my title there is the research lead. So I'm involved in trying we really aspire to have, to be deeply immersed in the work on the ground, be deeply immersed in supporting and cultivating systems change and building capacity to steward systems change, while also being consciously reflective of our work and doing research, which I would describe as inquiring into experience with method. And so I kind of sit at that end of the organization. And I have an affiliation with Concordia University here in Montreal, with a department called Applied Human Sciences. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more. And I live here with my partner and my 2 teenage sons. And yeah, my small Jack Russell who sat behind me, enjoying the conversation. Yeah. So I think we'll get into much more from there, but thanks so much for the invitation.
Well, it's a very succinct introduction, Eva. It's great to hear you, and we can go deeply into this topic. I'm assuming some people in the audience won't be deeply familiar with Theory U and the Presencing Institute's work on awareness-based systems change. So before we dive into more of the details, it'd be good for people to have a bit of background on what you mean by awareness-based systems change.
Sure. And maybe actually we had talked about maybe just a show of hands. How many people have some familiarity with maybe Theory U or the Presencing Institute? Or okay.
Almost 85–90%.
Okay. But some not. And so let's yeah, and I'll try. I'm not very good at keeping my eye on the chat while also speaking, but yeah, if there's a burning question, please throw it in there, and between us, I think we can.
Okay, I will do. Yeah.
Okay. So the awareness-based systems change is sort of an approach to stewarding and supporting transformative change, deep systems change, sustainable change that rests on the understanding or the assumption that to really cultivate a change that is sustainable, and is transformative. Those are semi synonymous. We need to be working at the kind of deepest levels of the system. And so, yes, that includes mental models, assumptions, all the kind of work that would be very present sort of in, say, organizational development. But actually to go sort of a level deeper than that and look at and address and work with the very sort of awareness or consciousness that gives rise to mental models.
Right.
And and maybe I would say we often talk about shifting that awareness we talk about it being ecosystem, which doesn't mean being egotistical. It just means that the system I'm holding in my awareness is very kind of small and inward looking.
Yeah.
Centered on me or my immediate system, and to broadening out that awareness to both seeing but also kind of feeling a much wider connection, right? So we would talk about that as an ecosystem awareness.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a very succinct description of the systemic shift Presencing Institute is trying to catalyze. And for people that may be unfamiliar, could you also do similarly around Theory U?
Sure.
Because that's core to the methodology you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And so Theory U is a body of work that was developed by Otto Scharmer. I always find it helpful to talk a little bit about where it came from. I think that helps to understand it better. And so Otto initially with Joe Jaworski and then on his own were really interested in exploring kind of the root source of creativity and innovation, right? And another way that they would phrase that, or that we can think about that, is they're very interested in exploring how do we learn from the future that wants to emerge. I mean, that is creativity, right? That's when the new comes into being. And so rather than sort of studying the past and projecting based on that, what are the modes of learning and being and structuring systems actually so that they can learn from the emerging future? And they did interviews with 150 entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists, spiritual leaders, to try and really understand the process of transformative change, the process of bringing something new into the world. And that resulted in Theory U. And we can think of Theory U, well, we can think of it in a few ways. One, it is sort of explanatory. It's a description of how deep systems change takes place, deep transformative change takes place. But also, and perhaps more than that, it's a process for supporting that kind of change. So it is both a framework for understanding, but it's a process and a method, and has a number of tools associated with it. It has also, particularly, we started, Erica, by talking about Gaia. It has over time also become a sort of a global community, ecosystem, potentially a movement. I think there's always debate about how do you define a movement, but those are some of the ways that we think about this body of work.
Yeah.
And what it is and what it does.
And I think I actually saw some of those dialogues that Otto did before it became Theory U. It was one of the first sort of leadership sites on the web, interviews with those characters. Might be just good also to outline a different approach to leadership that Theory U encourages, and the kind of leadership that creates a transformative shift, because that's what the main body of the Presencing Institute program is, the MOOC online. It might be good to refer to that also.
So do you want a little bit about our approach to leadership, or about the lab, or
more about the leadership approach than ULab itself? Yeah.
So what I would probably say first is the way of thinking about leadership is it would embrace people who be recognizable in formal leadership modes, but it really extends far beyond that. And leadership is really any place where a person is making something happen. Right. So it's widely applicable in families, right? In communities and small groups and organizations. So leadership might also just be thought of as stepping into your own agency.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And then when we talk about so you want to be part of making something happen, in the world, in your own system, where what we think of as the place to work, if you like, is on what we call the social field.
Yes.
And we would also talk about taking a social field perspective on systems change. And the way we think about the social field is, it embraces the entirety of a social system, right? Everything that you would see and think of as one, but it's also, we use the metaphor of the soil, the social soil. So we think about the social field as embracing both what you see above the ground, but really focusing on the quality of the soil, which is the quality of the relationships and the quality of relating.
Yeah.
So what is that? We talked a little bit about the kind of awareness that, gives rise to different mental models. Working on the quality of awareness held in a space. So it's held by individuals, but it's also kind of collectively. And that level of awareness will have a profound impact on the kind of relating and relationships, which then have profound impact on what results.
So you need to exercise a wider range of leadership skills to cultivate and build the social field. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, and probably predominantly the capacity to sense from a more ecosystemic awareness.
Okay.
Right? So there's two things in that. One is to not just see, but sense. So yes, using all of our analytical capacity and cognitive capacity, but also engaging and having some literacy of the heart, if you like, right? And being able to draw from a wide range of sources of knowing, embodied, intuitive, relational, and cognitive. And then being able to do that within from an ecosystemic awareness and perspective.
Well, that reminds me of one of the core things that Otto speaks about on the course, is enabling the system to see itself. Because generally we're split, and we think the system's out there and not that we're a part of the system. So how does having this ecosystemic awareness bring that into the interior, as it were, of each player? Because I think that is a profoundly different in the work from Otto and the Presencing Institute.
Yeah, and so there is, I mean, I think again there are two things. There is the being able to see, for the system to be able to see itself, and for all those who make up the system to be able to experience themselves as the system.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is one piece, but the other that I think is really significant is this sensing piece. So you talked about how do you bring this into the interior?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the systems thinking, or I mean, there's some really brilliant work about mapping out systems, right? So that you can really see them more clearly. What an awareness-based systems change approach brings is the sensing. And so that's, yeah, and it's through, I mean, tools and methods that have been developed over the last few decades to enable a system to really feel itself, not just to see as well, but to really experience on a visceral level, what is it to be this system? And it's only through really doing that that you can connect with, okay, wow, this is how I am embodying our collective, operating mode.
I like that. So a sense of how I'm embodying the eco field or the social field in which I'm active. So I think this is quite an interesting juncture to talk about how the development of this work has started to come to fruition into fourth person knowing. Is there a kind of origin story, or how has this sensing, as it were, this development of this collective sensing capacity enabled this phenomena of fourth person knowing to emerge? Maybe there's a story or illustration you can share with us to help understand it.
Well, it is always an interesting question. What came first, the experience or the conceptualization, and what's put out first? So I think I'm going to just say a little bit conceptually.
Yeah.
And talk about then I can talk about it more experientially. So we have the core concept of the social field, right? Our collective way of being together.
Yeah.
There's a level of the social field that is really about kind of the intersubjective, the interpersonal. So again, I talked about OD a little bit, or mentioned OD and group dynamics, and how is it? What are our patterns of interaction? What is how are we in conversation with each other? How do we organize ourselves? And that there's a lot of work and great work that's been done on that aspect of our collective being together, which I would talk about it on the more interpersonal level. And then what we're really trying to move into is that layer below, that is much less articulated. It's not articulated, but much less articulated around. If I say collective consciousness, people might go into the kind of the Carl Jung. It's not really
collective unconscious.
Yeah, it's unconscious, exactly. So it's not exactly what we're talking about, but it's sort of again, what is that awareness that we hold? And I think how did we move into this? I mean, I think it's by virtue of being part of what we'd call generative social fields, very powerful experiences of being together. Now, is there an origin story? I'm not sure there is an origin story.
Okay.
It would come around. I mean, I think again, somebody mentioned Eric, we were talking about Gaia, where thousands of people came together online in the first wave of the pandemic to just sort of be with this moment and sense into it.
Yeah.
With some support to bring a particular kind of awareness and attention to that moment together. It's hard to really unpack what happened from that, but there's, it's quite a powerful experience for many of helping them to hold what was happening, but also to see themselves through this collective, and therefore see themselves differently. And anyway, I'm going to move into the whole kind of fourth person piece, but it would be from kind of multiple experiences of either being in collective, sometimes on your own, where there's something that shows up, a kind of knowing or some intention that shows up that doesn't feel like it was generated by you. There's something else there that you're connecting with that then has a significant impact on action, perception, possibility. And again, I'm moving into the points that we're gonna.
So I mean, I was part of that Gaia journey. I think it was really reinforcing to be a part of a global community that was looking in a healthy direction. that was actually engaging creatively with the crisis and endeavoring to support one another. So I found, same as Erica mentioned, I found it very morale boosting to know that was there and to use and interact with the resources and the groups that were part of the Gaia journey.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there isn't an origination point, but somehow the substrate for this discovery was the Gaia journey was intrinsic to it. And so what can you, conceptually or otherwise, explain what this emergence or this recognition of this fourth dimension of knowing, how that's come about, or how you've noticed it? I think that might be a better way to put it. How you
Fine. And I think what we need to do is really describe what is it that we're talking about.
Yes,
And so what I'd say is also, we really aren't talking about this as discovery, because it doesn't feel like a discovery. It feels like just trying to put words on something that so many people know, right? And so many traditions that are touching on this. So we're trying to put it in a particular frame. And just to help maybe understand where we're coming from with that, again, we're trying to come from a research perspective. Research, again, applying method, inquiring into our experience with method. And so the reason why this whole thing is framed as the fourth person perspective, there are many ways it could be, we could easily call it the source knowing of the field. It's that as well. But we framed it in this fourth person with research in mind. And so if we track kind of the modern history of research, if we think about like the scientific revolution of the 17th century, like that's really the model of knowing is there's a world out there, I can discover it by observing, by bringing method and experiments, and come to know the world. Third person perspective, important. Then particularly in the 19th century, there's greater awareness about the ways in which, our worlds are socially constructed. So suddenly like, oh, actually my subjective experience becomes important. And hot on the heels of that is the intersubjective. So that's the kind of rise of qualitative research, right? It matters to get people's understanding of their experience. That's science too, right? So we want to capture that. And what we're trying to do, and the reason why this is framed as fourth person, is to point at a kind of knowing that doesn't really fit into any of those other categories.
Right.
Not really something we're observing from outside, although it is, it's kind of outside of us. It's not something that's completely coming from us, but it's kind of inside of us, right? And then it often also makes itself known between us. So what is that knowing that we talk about that comes through me but is not of me?
Right.
And so through we sort of, this was an interweaving of our own experiences doing this work and personally, and then gathering up all the data that we have over the last few years, interviews with people who through these different experiences, some interviews that we did with some of our senior practitioners and generative scribes, right? Because the arts, I think often if you speak to the artists, they know immediately, they're like absolutely like, we are on the same page almost immediately and dive in. So bringing all that together to say, okay, if we can try to kind of flesh out what is this experience, of this knowing that is not completely within me, neither is it completely outside of me. It's in some relationship between the two. And that's what we're trying to articulate with fourth person knowing. And we're trying to do that because it's really, that's where the new comes into being.
Right.
That it's not, I'm not going to observe it outside, and neither am I going to come up with, really the new just from everything that's always been. There's some relationship between the two that allows something new to become known.
So in a way, there's a direct lineage of connection to Otto and Joseph's first research into innovation, into your framing of this area of research.
Yeah, and actually, some people, especially in the academic world, Otto wrote a paper in 2001 on self-transcending knowing. It's actually his most cited work in academia.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's really early. It predates Theory U by years. But one of the ways we thought of this was just kind of an update of that. Like, okay, given there's been 20 years of action research experience in between, how would he and we articulate this now? Yeah. So absolute direct lineage to that. So theory use origin story.
Yeah. So you've sort of talked about the epistemologies of knowing, first, second, third, and now fourth. And you've also very open about, we're not claiming this is new, but I'm kind of interested what you've come across that is kind of analogous or similar or has resonates with this sort of it's coming through me, because maybe some visionary greatness of our great human beings have been a vehicle for that. So I'd love to correlate, your framing of it with what has already, some of what is already known or out there.
Sure. Yeah. And so I'll talk a little bit about the sort of bodies of work out there, and actually triggered another thought as well that just came out of looking at our data. And I think I should preface all this by saying, I mean, we really moved from experience then into the conceptualization. And so when I'm finding places that connect, I'm early in my own exploration of these spaces. So I just want to make that I don't want to voice or appear as though I'm coming in with expert knowledge of these areas. But I'll talk about 3 different areas that I think are connecting. And it might also just be worth talking about, as we put this work out there, we invited feedback and had so much feedback and resonance. And so that's also kind of feeding in. And that's why it's kind of fun to have this conversation now. And it was based on, I know I presented, and that's how we connected right after it was published. So So 3 areas that I think are connecting. I mean, one, you need to look at theology. Right. And it depends, people will have different connections to and different feelings about the concept of the divine. But I'd say in all theological traditions, you will find this. And we drew heavily from Martin Buber. So, the Jewish theologian, who I think he just articulates so beautifully this connection of, the future that stands in need of us. Right, what wants to be born but needs us to make it happen. So his work has been instrumental, but then also partly from my own exploration and partly from this feedback that we've had from people. It's connecting to Teilhard de Chardin, so in the kind of Catholic mysticism perspective around how you through action, and a particular kind of action with a particular kind of quality, right? Acting. That action actually brings you closer to what the divine, that there's a kind of embodied experience that brings us closer to that space. I think it comes up, I've had somebody point out about that it connects with the Buddhist concept of Drala, which, the kind of that heavenly realm, earthly realm, and that connection. One of our colleagues in India, I'm not going to get the name right, so I won't even try, but talks about also within her Hindu tradition, in between the letting go and the letting come, which is really instrumental in theory to presencing. She said, what about the descent? And so for her, there's very explicitly something else that appears, that descends in that space. So that whole area is one that I'm just actively, avidly reading and pursuing right now, because it's a real point of connection. Very, very different point of connection is some of what's going on in neuroscience, which is fascinating, and what people are calling second person neuroscience. And saying, oh, actually, if you look at what's going on neurologically when you are in connection with another person, it's quite actually different than when you are on your own. And even if you have an individual who's, watching a video of social interaction or something, and then some folks in neuroscience and sort of theory of mind saying we need to reconceptualize interaction. So there's me, one unit, there's you, the second unit, but there's the interaction. And it's its own thing. And there's a brilliant theoretician, a cognitive scientist, Hannah de Jager, who talks about the autonomy of the interaction itself. Autonomy life. And she always uses the example of, you're going down a corridor and you meet somebody in the corridor and you each are stepping to the side to avoid each other. And like she's saying, nobody wants that to happen, but the interaction has its own autonomy in it and it's acting. So there's something very interesting happening there. I think
Okay. Yeah.
right. And then there's also sort of from kind of transpersonal psychology, and we've drawn on this. So we drew on Buber a lot in the paper. We drew on some transpersonal psychology around this idea of the second person. And so there's one concept of it is, can I understand you where you're coming from? Can I step into your perspective?
Yeah.
There's this other piece about that is more aligned with the idea of the interaction, that there's something else when we
Right.
are engaging, and that's something else, right? That collective something else has its own sort of evolutionary path.
Right.
And so that's kind of another, I find that conceptually very aligned
Right.
with the fourth person. So there are some of these are some of the areas, and I'm sure there are more that.
And what was that, a particular school, or what's the name for this? There's a third.
Transpersonal psychology.
That's transpersonal.
Yeah, transpersonal psychology. I know there's somebody here named Harry Hunt, here being Canada, who writes about this particularly in relation to the climate crisis and
Right.
collective consciousness and what, our evolution there.
Brilliant. I think we're almost coming to the end, but I just want to put a little bit of a friend of mine was triggered when I wrote online on LinkedIn. This was kind of new.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, in the way, if I was more careful and explaining it as this is a developing new research perspective, maybe I wouldn't have got the reaction. But they were making claims and saying that indigenous ways of knowing that actually have a precedent for this, and they need acknowledgement and valuing, and we shouldn't be, trumpeting newness when there's precedent before. So I'm interested in your response to that critique.
Yeah, no, 100% correct. And if in the paper, which we should share,
Yes,
we
I'll
talk
send it out as a follow-up. I'll send the
Okay.
paper out. Yeah.
Right. Just how informed we've been by Indigenous scholarship.
Okay. Yeah.
And how there's a author here, Sean Wilson, who I mean, he's really just speaking about I don't know if this would be probably a pan-Indigenous worldview, but from his own, I believe he's Cree background, that knowledge sits in the cosmos.
Right.
And it's sort of gifted to us, like it comes through us from the cosmos, from a broader space. And so there isn't an ownership, and so your friend was rightly sort of irked.
Yeah.
A claim to it being new, because there's a claim to discovery. That means that it's a claim to ownership. It's a completely different paradigm from knowledge being held around, between us, and when we are lucky enough or paying the right kind of attention, being gifted with it coming through us. So that's very much the sort of perspective of fourth person. And the work on generative social fields is to try and create the conditions that might make it more likely to be able to make that connection with the knowing that's held in the field.
Thanks so much. I think I'm really impressed by the rigor and your fluency in communicating this terminology. And I feel myself struggling. First person, well, how do you describe it? How do you put words to what this is? And I think everyone's in some degree finding their way by fumbling, as it were, you could say.
Yeah. And we're doing this without slides, Dave.
Yeah,
because I said, let's have a conversation, not do a presentation.
I prefer that than slides myself. So let's just end the interview there. And maybe we could open it up for a few questions before we break, because then if there's anything people want to really tease out with you, we can